Greetings everybody, my name is Tommy the Game Master and welcome to my channel. Well, today we are going to be looking at the definitive edition of what probably is my second favorite Tales game overall, and a lot of people's number one favorite. And it was my first Tales game I've ever played too. And there is a reason why a lot of people do enjoy this game so much, and that is it's so different from a lot of JRPGs, especially from its storytelling, or at least for the first two-thirds of its story. It also has a really excellent battle system, and consider how there was a Japanese PlayStation 3 version that had stuff that never came out on our American 360 version. It's easy to see why fans were excited for a remaster. How excited? Well, a few years ago, somebody made an awful April Fool's joke called Tales of Vesperia R, basically saying that Bandai Namco was going to be releasing said definitive edition. The April Fool's joke was well put together, but released a few days too early. Because of that, people were prepared for that kind of joke landing up in discussions board, and in the end, a lot of angry and frustrated fans started lobbing death threats at Bandai Namco, who weren't even responsible for said April Fool's prank. Still, it was enough for them to see the demand, so during Microsoft's press conference last year, they officially announced that Tales of Vesperia was getting a definitive edition, and I just played through it. So is this definitive edition worth picking up? Well, let's find out. I guess I should tell people there will be some spoilers in this review. I'll try not to give out anything too big away, and I'll try not to give out anything too new. But the original game was released over a decade ago, so a lot of what I'm about to say really applies to that, and since it's been 10 years, I don't really feel too bad for spoiling something that old. I'm sorry, but just to let people know there's a spoiler warning for this section. I will try to put a timestamp in so you can avoid it if you really want to avoid spoilers, but let's talk about the story. Anyways, a lot of people cite this as probably one of the best JRPG stories since the PlayStation 1 era of Final Fantasy games, and for the most part, they're right. For the first two-thirds of the game, it completely avoids some of the more annoying JRPG tropes. Yuri Lowell, the main protagonist, is not a chosen one. He's never had his village destroyed. He's not a bright-eyed, idealistic youngster who never had his ideals challenged, nor is he emo for the sake of being emo. What he is a person, although not destitute, has lived his whole life on the lower classes of the empire he lives in. Seeing how their corrupt policies have affected said lower class, and while he did try to take a stab at rising above this by joining the Knights, which they actually made a movie about this short mess adventure of his, that all fell apart. This has left him with a rightfully cynical nature and attitude, but he's never stopped caring about those around him, nor has he ever lost his sense of humor. To put it simply, Yuri may be cynical, but he's not a heartless douchebag. It does certainly make him different, so rather than having a character arc like you would see with a younger protagonist, Yuri's growth more comes with him experiencing what it's like to be a leader and a father figure of a group of people. He doesn't have any huge character-changing moments where he has to bend his ideologies after finding out the world can never be perfect, but rather challenges that help define him as a person and just how far he's willing to go to see the changes he wants in the world. This includes having to assassinate a corrupt official or two after they put friends or lives of other people in danger because they have the thinking that the common people are just their playthings, or even going so far to help someone who he deeply respects commit seppuku to prevent a war between the guilds that would be disastrous for a lot of people. The rest of the cast is also really superb. You get Estelle, who is a bookworm noble who's never been out of her castle, and starts off by taking everything Yuri has to say, literally.
Next week.
Next week? But can you really?
Never mind.
Carol, a young man who is out to establish his own place in the world just as soon as he can get over some of his cowardice. Rita Mordio, a genius mage with an attitude problem. Raven, the dirty old man of the group, who we do find out later actually has a pretty deep backstory, and his jovial, perverted nature is just an act to cover up some really deep-seated pains. And these are actually interesting character developments for this guy. Judith, who has her own lifelong mission that just happens to coincide with Yuri's, but not with Rita's, and that also leads to some interesting development. And finally, the newest edition of the game, Patty, a young amnesiac girl, out to solve the mystery of what happened to the pirate Ifrid because she believes it will help get her memory back. Patty's a decent addition, and overall I like her, but she is shoehorned in. Because they changed Yuri's voice actor for some of the newer lines, and I will talk about that later in this review, you can't see areas where her dialogue was added in, as she is now actually part of the scene, an area where she just talks because she's there, and the developers decided to let her have her own 2 cents in that scene. And there are a lot of areas where she's now just there. Again, not a bad character. I enjoyed having her along in her story bits, but a shoehorned in character is still a shoehorned in character. And then Flynn, Yuri's idealistic best friend, and one that is more typical Tales protagonist like Lloyd Irving, is now playable during the sections of the story where he's tagging along with Yuri, and a few new sections where he's just thrown in because of it. He's not there long enough to really care about when it comes to his weapons or abilities, which is unfortunate as I kinda like Flynn. You see, Flynn joined the Knights to get into the government to see if he could stop the corruption through good examples and good leadership, and that runs very counter to Yuri's idea of stabbing said corrupt officials in the back and throwing them off bridges. Basically, to put it simply, Flynn is Superman to Yuri's Batman, and I just love the scenes where the two are together, whether they are agreeing to help each other or giving each other a hard time over the other's poor decisions and screw-ups. I guess I should talk about Repeat just a little bit, since he's not really a character, since he's a dog and all that. He is still somewhat interesting, and it's an interesting idea to put a dog in as one of the main characters of a group. But basically, if you must know, he's a Shiba Inu, basically a mutant version that can use knives and ninja skills, I guess. But his attitude is that of a Shiba Inu and a lot of other Japanese dogs. In other words, he can be very intelligent, he's very capable, he can be very independent. You see Yuri send him to do stuff that he's not around, and he can seem to do it. He even is smart enough in one scene when Yuri decides to ditch the others to go deal with some trouble on his own to bring the others back to Yuri so they could beat the crap out of him for going off on his own. So he's very intelligent. That said, like a lot of Shiba Inus, if they don't like you, let's just say I feel sorry for Estelle, because if they don't like somebody, they will just give them a cold shoulder, and that's what you do see Repeat doing with Estelle, and I do feel sorry for her. So what is the plot about? Well, again, we're not dealing with the tropes, so the initial story is simple. Yuri is just out to acquire the core of a water blastia, which is a magical MacGuffin that helps bring in water to the lower districts of the Imperial City, and along the way manages to piss off a lot of corrupt officials, just either due to his bad luck or simply because he just enjoys pissing off said corrupt officials. Again, it starts slow, but it allows us to get our heads around the characters to see the politics of this world without having to get so far into them that it starts to feel stale. The second act starts right after the first, when set to go home because he now has the water blastia. He was after he finds out that Estelle's gift in magic has come to be known by an ancient race of monsters known as the Antilocheum, and they basically want to wipe her existence off the face of the planet because of it. Yuri, who has decided to start up his own small group known as a guild, decides his first mission is to find out where these ancient monsters came from and why they are after her. From there, we go from everyday politics to ancient ruins, ancient catastrophes, some really good and legit betrayals that I won't spoil here, and a bad guy who goes from respectable protector to despicable monster that he's just so fun to hate and want to bring down towards the end. And if it just left off with Yuri's confrontation with him, this would go down as a perfect JRPG story, but nope. Said individual unleashes the gates of hell and brings catastrophe down on the world, leading to the game's unnecessary third act where all the JRPG tropes that it took pains to avoid come roaring back. Let's start with the first and original trope, collecting the 4 treasures of the elements. Check. How about two-dimensional villain who is angry that human beings can be rotten and therefore decides it's okay to destroy them all? Double check. And let's not forget environmental spiels about how much technology is bad for the planet. Everything it builds up just comes crashing down on top of that, and there's no real epilogue to the game where we find out what these people do after the game is over. It just ends with Yuri whipping out the world's largest lightsaber and using it to save the planet, and that's basically it. First 2/3 are just so solid, and it's so disappointing to see it come crashing down on the last third. These disappointments do not mean that it's a bad JRPG story, far from it, but it misses the mark of perfection by so little that it ends up being a big disappointment when it doesn't hit it. I remember the first time I played through this game, just being blown away by its battle system. To me, the game is more like a frantic brawler that's been put inside a JRPG shell. Oh, don't get me wrong, you're still going to towns, talking to townspeople, upgrading weapons and stats, and customizing the ability of you and your parties and getting EXP points. But the battles, it's an all-out action scene where you have to use base arts combos to do damage to fill your TP meter so you can use your special arts. To make things even more frantic, there is a bar on the side of the screen where the more attacks you land, the higher that bar fills up. This lets you do burst arts when it's full, and the last third of the game, your characters can equip something called special that lets you turn those burst arts into the super OP mystic arts. It's a really fun combat system, and I love playing through the game with it. Unique to this one, though, is the ability to do fatal strikes that happen when you perform certain arts on an enemy enough to whittle their health down that a special mark appears, finishing them off. With that will give you higher grades and more item drops. The game also takes a page out of Final Fantasy IX's playbook and having the abilities attached to weapons that can be learned by using them for a certain amount of battles. The skills are mad useful, and there hardly ever seems to be enough points for the abilities I want, so I have to end up choosing wisely. Also, you learn new arts in battle and not through leveling up, so while sticking a character in the back won't change their levels, and you can still learn their abilities that are equipped to their weapons. If you want their best attacks out of them, you're going to have to put them up front in battle, or otherwise you won't ever unlock them. Finally, one last thing I want to talk about the gameplay section is one of the more unique elements, and that is if you get attacked in the back by an enemy, not only do they start off with an advantage, but you're thrown into the battle where your characters you put in the back row end up being in your party for this fight, really screwing up your combat strategies when this happens. I actually think it's a really fun, if sometimes annoying mechanic, but it's a mechanic I would love to see in more JRPGs just to spice things up a bit. I won't lie and say the graphics haven't aged. There are definitely some age spots in the game, and it's hard not to notice some of the stiffer facial animations that we can get in some of the game's cutscenes. But for a game that is a decade old, the game is still beautiful. We really get some great looking set pieces, good cel shading coloring on the characters, and although dated, some good animations. The game also runs at a constant 60 frames per second on the PS4, with one exception that happens in this one town in the desert where there can be a lot of people on screen at once, and this does cause the frame rate to stutter quite a bit. It only happens in that one area, but it is noticeable when you go through that area. Other than that, the graphics are pretty good for a 10-year-old game. The music is top-notch, and like Tales of Symphonia's HD remastered, the game does allow both English and Japanese selection at the start of the game. If you like having your JRPGs done with Japanese vocals, well, there you go, you now have that. As far as the English dub goes, it's actually pretty solid, with most of the voice casts returning to do new lines, so every main story scene now has the appropriate voiceovers, and return for a few new lines that deal with Patty and her story. As far as who does Patty's voice, well, who does every annoying ankle-biting brat in anime, and if your guess is anything but Sandy Fox, then you're wrong.
What the hell is a brat like you doing trying to get in here?
Aw, don't throw a hissy fit. Have a bite of this and calm down.
Now for the one other odd replacement and why it has caused such a stir in the Tales community, and that is the replacement of Troy Baker as the main lead Yuri Lowell. And unlike, say, Kairi in Kingdom Hearts 3, this is worth getting upset about. I can understand a little bit why Namco Bandai did the change. They like to do their English voiceovers on the cheap side of things, and they're not afraid to replace an entire cast of actors in a game if it becomes too expensive to hire said original voice actors. And Troy Baker in the last 10 years has gone from a nobody voiceover who's only had a few roles at Funimation under his belt to voicing the goddamn Batman himself. So obviously probably going to cost a bit more to hire him. With that said, Bandai Namco didn't even reach out to him, and he said he would have loved to have redone the part because he likes the character of Yuri Lowell. So yeah, bad move on Bandai Namco's part when it comes to this particular recast, especially since it's only some new lines that now have been redubbed, and because of that change, and some of these lines happen in the middle of the conversation, the new guy sticks out like a sore thumb. That said, as far as his overall performance, the new guy actually does a pretty good Yuri Lowell. His voice is a little lower than Troy Baker's, but for the most part he hits 99% of his lines with only one or two really groan-inducing lines. But for the most part, he does a bang-up job. This isn't a case of a bad recast, this is a case of an unnecessary recast, and fans have the right to be angry at Bandai Namco for their decision to replace the actor when there was no need to.
Be careful out there. All right, shall we each go our own way for now?
So is Tales of Vesperia Definitive Edition worth picking up? Well, if you've never played Tales of Vesperia, definitely get this one. It's the best version of it. Definitely worth $60. If you already have the Xbox 360 version, would I recommend picking it up? Yes, but there's no crime in putting it on your wish list and waiting for a Steam sale or waiting for a discount someplace. Waiting for it to land on the bargain bin for $30. Because there is a lot of new stuff here, but not quite new enough where I would necessarily say go all in with the $60. Overall, solid game, worth picking up if you haven't played it. If you have, it's worth waiting until it hits the bargain bin. There's a lot of new stuff, but waiting until it's $20 to $30 off isn't a bad idea either. This is Tommy the Game Master, signing out, thanking you for watching this video. I'll see you guys later.